Hi guys, Leif here, aka Evil Nerd Inc., and I'm continuing on with the second part of the Infinite Terrain project, which is, as you recall from last time, we were moving to make this blast crater. So the last time I showed you actually how to cut MDF hardboard and to actually get your base done. This is the most important part for all of your terrain projects probably, because you're going to be doing this on all of them. Today what I'm going to show you is how to cut the boards, cut the insulation board in such a way to make these organic rock shapes, as well as add plaster Paris for the center blast area, and then adding the sand around on the edges. So in this video we're going to do the rest of the construction, and then in the third video I will show you how I actually paint it as well, which will be a real easy process. But let's dive right into it. So as I was just saying, what I'm going to show you is how to cut your insulation board to make the rocks that are going to go onto here. Really the things that you're going to need is some sort of insulation board. I'm using this, it looks like 1/2 inch pink foam insulation board, which is used for insulating houses. It doesn't matter if it's pink or blue or anything, it literally can be any type of foam, but you can see that the foam itself is actually very densely packed here. Sometimes people will use the type of foam that they get with electronic devices, similar to their TV or something like that, and you'll see on the cross section, if you were to cut it, which I'll demonstrate here, that this is nice and tightly packed, whereas other ones it'll look like loose, like there's little debris like area in between the foam. That's really cheap foam. What we're trying to do is use this little bit better packed foam. You can get a large sheet of this, I believe, for $5 from your local hardware store like Lowe's. And in this like thinner amount, you should be able to get it. If you get a real big piece, it's like the 2 inches thick, you may pay upwards of $30 or $40, but you're gonna get like 4 feet by 8 feet, and it will be more than you'll need for probably a lifetime. So the other thing that you're gonna need is a razor blade of some sort. I prefer to use X-Acto blades. That's actually the brand of the razor blades. But any type of hobby knife will work, or just razor blade in general. And then you want something to cut on. A lot of people will use self-healing boards. I happen to have a piece of this laying around, so I didn't dig out my self-healing board. What you're going to be doing is, on this piece, we're going to create these little rock faces that go around the edge, and we're going to want around a dozen of these. And so we're going to want to create a dozen little features that'll go around the edge, and then we'll fill in the middle with plaster and the outside with sand. So what we're going to want to do is basically cut features like this, little triangular features. So what I'll do is I'll just cut a piece like this. I'm not worried, like I pushed in a little bit there and caught my guard. I'm not too worried about anything like that, because this will all get cleaned up here in a little bit. So I'm going to cut them kind of into these triangular shapes, roughly speaking. You can see that I can cut part of the way through and then I can break it. If you end up with ones that are more square or anything, that's fine. You'll see why I'm cutting triangular shapes here in a moment. I'll kind of prompt you for that, I suppose. So we've got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm going to need a little bit more, so I'll cut along this line as well. Break it, and then I'll cut some longer ones like this. Maybe one that looks a little bit more like a trapezoid. Alright, so we got 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and these will probably get broken up a little bit more, because some of these are going to be smaller, some of these are going to be larger. I don't care, you see I'm not working off of any type of template or anything, and I've got plenty of extra. I mean, this piece was only about as large as not as large as this. It was like maybe 12 inches by 4.5 inches. This is gonna be more foam than I need for a long time. I've just cut out a lot of these shapes so that way it's easy to work with. So I have these kind of triangular shapes, and you saw how I generated those by having a long strip and then cutting across them. Then what I'm gonna do is I'm basically going to take my razor blade and cut edges, corners, if you will, off of these shapes, which are going to give me this more bolder rounded shape here. What I'm going to want to do is, because I'm going to be kind of putting these somewhat in like a clock face around the outside here, I'm going to want to leave one end of it a little bit more pointed in, and that's they're all gonna be coming in towards the middle of my blast crater a little bit. You'll see as I go along that I'm gonna end up leaving bits more like this that are longer coming in, and then other pieces I will cut off like this. And all I'm gonna do is kind of create this nice geometric shape by cutting off additional corners. Hopefully that makes sense, that I'm not really like sculpting it, right? I'm not rounding it out. I'm creating more and geometric shaping to it as I go on by just cutting away a little bit more each time. And then like for this piece, I may not want it quite this high because that's going to make a pretty big piece. So what I'll do, you can also cut on your MDF board because this is all going to get covered up anyways. I'm going to very carefully slice through and take part of this off. This will give my rock a little bit lower profile to the ground here. And just like that, my first one's done. I'm not too worried about it being perfect. I'm going to cut a little bit more off, and even still. There we go. So you can take it down as little as you want, or you can leave it higher. So I'll demonstrate. I'll kind of move these out of the way and leave this here. Hopefully you'll be able to see that. Sometimes you'll have on the back, you'll have some printing stuff, and depending on the type of foam that you get, it'll actually be a thin plastic layer. So like if I grab this, in this particular one it didn't work, but sometimes if it's a thin plastic layer, you can just cut the edge and you can peel the whole thing off and all that print will come off. That really makes no difference for what I'm going to be doing with my terrain piece here. It's just sometimes those little extra bits will like that plastic piece will make it harder to stick to your MDF board in the end. So that's the only reason that you'd really worry about cutting it off. As I said, with this one, it's not a big deal. So you don't want to have too spiky corners. Like you don't want to have it come out like just like a true triangle like that and completely flat. You see, like I've just kind of cut it away in various parts. I can also go in and cut like a V basically, and that will make a deeper cut in like a recess into the rock as well. And so I could add something like that, and then I'll look and I'll say, oh well, that's too big like that. Okay, that's more rounded out on the back now, and I've still got my point that's facing in towards the middle of my piece here. So these aren't glued down or anything. These are just roughly arranged to where I'm going to be, so I know how many more that I have to create. You also have a lot of excess little pieces, and like these pieces you can either throw away or you could keep. Some of them you may find like this might be a big enough piece that I want to use this. And this was just one of the pieces that I cut off from the bottom. So I may look and say, oh, that's not too bad, you know, I'll add that as another little rock feature. That one's a little small for me, but depending on further projects, surprisingly the scraps that you end up using can be quite useful for all kinds of projects. So you can see, basically I just start by cutting off the corners on the top. I just have it as a flat piece, and then I go through and I just start slicing off. There's not really a whole lot of rhyme or reason to where I'm cutting. I just kind of look and see where I think I want a piece more revealed or less revealed, and then I end up cutting it. And like there, look, I made a little mistake, right? That I cut, but it was too shallow of an angle and I didn't get all the way through. But it's okay, because it doesn't really matter. Like, I'm just using this as a piece that I'm going to add onto here. Now, not all of these pieces am I going to want to have them all pointing in. Most of them I'm going to, but I mean, even this is still going to be pointing in a little bit. But what I'm going to be basically creating is these little valleys coming out from the center. So the center is going to be a large blast crater here, and then there will be little runnels of molten rock that are coming out through the larger pieces. So you know, I can move these around however I want, you know, and organize these because they're not stuck on there yet. You don't have to worry about even spacing. You can space them out as much as you want. The positive thing of what just happened is, even though I kind of made a little mistake where I had cut it through, because I'd cut it so deep, I can actually use this other pieces as one of my larger rock faces if I want. So I'm going to do one of those V cuts here. Make sure when you're using your blade to be very careful. If there's any kids watching this, ask your parents for help. Seriously. I don't recommend doing this on your own. I cut with holding things in my hand and towards myself, which is not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to cut away from yourself at all times. But I've been working with models so long that I know how much pressure I can put before a product gives away. Not to say that I haven't cut myself before, I have. And that's one of the ways that you should not do that. So if anybody's watching this and they're unfamiliar with how to cut, I will demonstrate here for you in just a second how the proper method for cutting is. And if you're unsure, ask somebody that knows. If you're underage, if you're a kid, ask your parents, because they will have worked with hobby knives at one point, more than likely. So the proper way of actually cutting is to always keep the blade facing away from you. So it is impossible to cut yourself. If you are cutting like this, like what I was doing a moment ago, you have the possibility of slicing yourself, and the blades are very, very sharp. So what you want to do is hold the item, just like a carrot or anything that you're cooking, further away, and then you cut with your blade away, because the back of the blade is not sharp. I can push, and obviously I'm not going to hurt myself. And then you will want to cut away like that. That is the proper technique for cutting anything. But as I am showing you, I do some weird things with my cutting techniques. Because I've learned over time that it's just more efficient for me to hold the pieces and be very conscious of the way that I'm cutting. I use very, very light amount of pressure. I don't push hard because foam will give very easily. So just be careful. You can cut away into the parts of the stone like what I just did and make these little indentions. And then you can just like kind of use the edge of the blade to flick it away. That's very easy to do. And you can see that right now I've got 5 easy pieces. So I'll speed up the rest and just show you how the rest of them work. They're all going to be in these kind of organic geometric shapes, because that's how stones look, especially when they're larger. And we're not worrying too much about the details. Some of them will be longer, some of them will be shorter and fatter and rounder, some will be higher and some will be lower. That's okay. We want that. And the one thing that we will try to do is the ones that are higher, we'll try to like make a little bit of a gradient. The pieces that stick up higher, maybe we'll put on this end, and the ones that are a little bit lower, we'll put down here. So that way it looks like a mortar shot or a missile shot or something struck from this direction and then blew part of the stone like up and flattened it out over on this side. So I'll do a little time lapse here and I'll show you. Okay, so there we have our approximately 12. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So pretty close to 12. Make sure to always cap off your blades and stuff like that. Don't leave them laying around. We have cats and we don't want them to step on them and hurt themselves. Clean up your work area. Make sure some of these larger pieces, right, I might still keep. And then some of the small pieces I'll probably end up throwing away. I will show you points and little tips and tricks for where you can use little pieces of debris like all of this. So what I'll do for this stuff is I'll actually end up keeping it, and I'll demonstrate in a later video how to use little bits of rubble like that, and specifically for how to make them effectively look like rubble in a fast way. And the larger pieces I'll keep in a separate one. So now that these are on here, and you can see I've roughly arranged them in the type of positioning that I want, what I'm going to do is then I'm going to grab my wood glue, which is hidden in here somewhere. There we go. Now, I've shown you in previous videos that I have wood glue in a large 1 gallon, but I also have, I'll use the same glue, but I'll just have one of these smaller wood glue containers, and hopefully it's not all dried up. So, always make sure to clear the end of your nozzle here, because you can see, like, I hadn't used this in a while and it kind of got real chunky, and so make sure to clear it out. Then what you want to do is just use a little bit of it on the back. You can squeeze it and actually use the applicator tip as almost like a brush to apply the glue to each part. You can see my wood glue is a little chunky here. That's okay. It's not going to hurt anything. It's just going to be a little harder to work with. As you see, it's coming out here kind of in a big glob and stuff because I hadn't used it in some time, and it was just had been sitting for too long, evidently. So I'm not worried about getting a little overflow like that. I was just trying to be a little productive and use as much of. I try conserving glue and things like that as much as possible because I just don't want to buy more of it, right? Like the hobby for working on miniatures and just gaming in general is already so expensive that that anywhere that I can save a little bit of extra money is beneficial. So like right there, like I see that there's a bunch of extra glue creeping out, so I'll use that to actually glue down the other parts. The glue is not the only thing that's going to be holding these in place, so I've got these 3 left to go and then that's it. There'll also be the plaster of Paris, which will be used to hold things in place. This is initially to set it, and then once I put the plaster in, then it'll be locked in place pretty good. And then I'll also be applying, in the painting stage, I'll be applying house paint and stuff, which will also help kind of keep everything in place too. So it doesn't have to be, you could probably even use less glue than what I'm currently using, but I like a nice secure hold on this because I really don't like having to work on my tabletop terrain too often. Like I don't like having to repair it. So make sure to push it down because as you're seeing, sometimes it'll kind of pop up when you cut it. You'll get like a concave cut rather than like a nice flat cut, and sometimes you'll get a little too much glue. So I'll wipe a little bit of that off so that way it'll cure faster. And you can also still reposition at this point a little bit. Like I'm fairly happy with the way all this is turned out right now. It looks a long way from the finished product, but you can start to see now what's going on. These are raised up between, I would say, 1/4 inch and a 1/2 inch for my European or metric users. It's maybe like, I don't know, around about 1 centimeter to 2.5 centimeters or something like that high. I'm not up on my metrics as much as I used to be. But you can see the general layout, right? I've created this small space in the center that's somewhat round, and I'm spacing it out now a little bit more to make sure that it has this kind of like oblique feature. But there's a nice center space where that's mostly going to be filled with plaster, which is going to raise the center part up less than a centimeter, and then these are going to create these higher artifacts, you know, these higher areas right here. And then the outside will end up being covered with all of the sand, which will give it a nice texture. And we'll work in some of the sand into the middle and into the little like spaces in between the rocks as well too. And then paint it and obviously do the snow effects and things like that too. But this is the first step. So we'll want to let our wood glue set for maybe, it doesn't have to be a terribly long time, but I want it to be fairly secure there. I think I'm going to give this between 15 and 20 minutes, and then I will shoot the next video in the kitchen where I'll be using the plaster Paris, and that will be a very quick video because plaster Paris has a short wait time. So stay tuned, and in just 1 second you'll see the next portion. Alright guys, so now I'm in my kitchen. As you can see, it's right over my sink. I'm showing you this here because I'm going to use water, and I want an area that I can clean up very easily. So I'm using my kitchen sink, but if you have like a shop sink for your you know, your garage or something like that, that'll work perfectly. You're going to need water. You're going to need what we just worked on, this the base that we had put the pink foam pieces on. You're also going to want something to mix in. I just have a fast food restaurant cup, something that I've washed out. It's clean, as you can see. But it's something that you can use a plastic cup or something else like that, but I prefer to just use something that's disposable, so once I'm done with my plaster, I can just throw it away. And then you'll want something, I've used this plastic knife several times before. You can use a regular knife or whatever, but I have just some spare things that if I want to I can throw it away, but I generally clean it off. I just wipe it off and it will work again for the next time. And then obviously you're going to need plaster Paris. I've got a big, I don't know what this is an 8-pound container of it. I believe I picked it up for $10. So, and this has lasted me an incredibly long time. And then last but not least, you're going to need some sort of measuring cups to know approximately. It doesn't actually have to be a measuring cup. You could use something else. But I use a measuring cup so that way, I don't know, it's something that I have in the kitchen here. So what you want to do is you want to add about 2-to-1 ratio is what the guidelines say. So I'm going to put in 1 cup of my plaster of Paris, and then approximately another cup. You can see I'm a little short on that. Then you want to make sure you're adding cold water, not hot water. That's very, very important because plaster Paris puts off heat. So if you put in hot water, you will speed up the reaction time and you'll have less working time with the product. So you saw that I actually added in a little bit more, so I was closer to a 2-to-1, but that's because I wanted it a little bit milkier to start. And then I think I'm going to add in a little bit more because it's a little too, like, there's some thick parts of it, but not quite enough. So I will just carefully put that back down and get a little bit more plaster and add that in. And then I'm making sure to wash my measuring cup off right away because it will get destroyed pretty easily. That's kind of why I use a throwaway cup is and you see I'm just stirring it up, getting a nice thick consistency here. If you let plaster say anything, then you have to like chip it off, like break it away from it. You can hear my cat in the background begging for food. But you see that it's got this nice thick quality. You know, if I move it to one side, it has some runnier parts to it, but it also it's like a very, very thick milkshake is the best way that I can describe it for you. So you only have about, from the time that you pour the water to the time of it basically getting to the point where it's not really workable anymore, you only have about 6 minutes. So this is a very quick process. Then what you're seeing that I'm doing is I'm just adding some of this right here into the middle, right? I'm just pouring my plaster. I've got more plaster than I need. It's always best to put a little bit extra plaster than what you're actually going to need for your project, because it's so cheap. It's okay that you're throwing a little bit of it away. Be aware that if you're using anything metal to work with the plaster, because it's endothermic, right? It has a reaction where it heats up to form a solid, that anything that's metal or plastic you might feel the heat through. So actually in that cup, in a minute or two, I will start to, if I pick that cup up again, it will feel warm to the touch. All I'm doing now is I'm taking the plaster and I'm spreading it out into these little gaps in between the rocks. This is what's going to make it look kind of like tying all of this together, for one. If I get it on the rocks, that's okay. It's not a big deal. But I am creating a little bit of a gradient for this to come out. And that's what's going to tie this whole piece together and give us the look that I had on my other finished one that I was showing you earlier. Is that this all looks like one big piece of rock, right? Like the ground was struck and the rock there had been melted, and parts of it had shattered and parts of it had, had that other effect. That's what I'm going for here. So all I'm doing is I'm kind of bringing it out into these recesses and stuff, and you can see it's starting to hold its shape. Right now, when I dip my knife into it and I make a little hole like that, it doesn't move out of the way. That's because it's already starting to harden up. It only takes a few minutes to do so, and as the shine goes away, that's when it's getting even more and more so like that. So I'm also going to get a little bit of water here because I can smooth out any of these little defects. So you've actually got some working time here to go through and finish off however it is that you want it to look, right? Like, I want it to look fairly smooth at first, and I will let it dry for a moment before I keep working on it. Then I'll add little cracks into the center and stuff. So all I've done right now is basically pushed some of this out into these different recesses because I want there to be a nice little gradient, and then when I add my gravel onto it, then it'll look like it's all part of the same thing, right? I'm not doing too much on the outside with this, as you can see, because I don't want it to look as though the blast was, that it's like a volcano or something. If I want it to look more natural, like it's just bubbling up through the earth, the base would be, the circle of rocks would be smaller, and then I'd do more plaster work around the outside, but I'm really only going to do the stuff here on the inside. If I find that there's too much, I can always use my knife or whatever utensil you're using. I use a knife because I think it's easiest for this type of project here. I can kind of scoop some of this away as well, as I've just shown you, right? I can take some of the plaster of Paris off, and then the stuff that's a little bit more shall we say like watery is kind of more on the top. So what I'm doing now is I've taken some of the excess off and I'm smoothing it out and stuff, and right here in the middle I'm kind of pushing it down a little bit. I'm putting a very, very small amount of pressure, and this is going to give it kind of like a concave shape, right? It's going to bow down here where it's struck. So this is going to be the lowest part of my crater, and I'm just making small circular motions because I don't want to leave fingerprints and stuff in this. I don't want to really push down. I'm just kind of spreading everything out and making the level where I want it to be at this point. So you can do as little or as much of that as you want. I'm a little bit more picky with it at this point. And you can see it's on my hand. This is non-toxic. It's not going to hurt you or anything. It can go down the drain. Plaster Paris is good like that. You should run it a little bit to make sure that it's not sticking into your pipes, causing a buildup. If you put a bunch of plaster down your drain and you don't run any water with it, that's not a good plan. You'll clog up your drains. So again, kids, if you're going to work with plaster of Paris and stuff, talk to your parents. I can wash off my utensils though, and you see it's just because first of all it hasn't hardened. It comes off very easily, and there's a very, very small amount of it that's going down the drain. If you're on a septic system or something like that, like some places in the US, you may want to consider using a bucket. I am not in a place. I'm in Atlanta where there isn't any septic or anything like that. So that's not an issue for me. So you can see that I've got a little bit of texture here. Like if I want, I could create texture with my knife or something like that. What I'm going to do is just make sure that this is nice and smooth. And you can see that the shine is, hopefully you'll be able to see that. The shine is starting to go away a little bit. It's starting to look a little bit smoother. Up here it's still quite shiny, but down here at the bottom, it is, or where it's more, where I built it up more, it's still more shiny. Down here though, it's starting to dry out a little bit more, and that's from it starting to heat up a little bit. And what I'm going to do with my knife, I did this before with the other one, is very carefully I'm going to add cracks. So I'm basically going to take from different parts, I'm going to run the knife edge along here and create little cuts and folds in this. Now I'm also going to use my razor blade as well. I'm also going to use my razor blade as well, as you can see, to give me a little bit more. The knife that I had there works fine, but it's a very bulky knife, whereas this is a little bit more, pun intended or not, is a little bit more exact, right? You can see I get much finer lines, and I also want to make sure to keep this knife clean too, because if I don't wash the plaster off fairly quickly, they can harden on there, and then I can lose the sharpness of my blade, which is something I don't want to do. So right now it's easiest to work with when it's still wet. I could cut into this later. I don't have to do this right now, but I prefer to do it now because when it's in this kind of gelatinous state as it is, it's easy to cut into, and I can smooth it if there's a way that I can, something I don't like here, maybe I want to smooth this out some, or I want to change the way that it it looks. I can go back over it and smooth it with my finger. I can add a little bit of coarseness actually with my finger too, as you're seeing that I'm doing right here, like kind of just dragging my fingertip across it. I'm not pausing and pushing, because then I'll leave fingerprints, or I'll grab it and it'll make these little upward spikes, as you can see right here maybe. But I'm very carefully pushing, just kind of dragging my finger around, and that's going to give it a little bit of texture. Throughout this process, you can keep going back and changing it as it's drying. You only have around 10 minutes. If you don't want to do this with the pieces you've already cut, because you're feeling like, I don't know the way that this is going to turn out yet, you can always practice with a little plaster of Paris first, and then come back, right? So you see that it's got a good amount of texture here in the middle, but I might look at it, and I'll turn my water just down to a little pour. I might say that's a little too much. So then I'll come over and I'll just add a little, literally my fingertip is moist, and that's all that I need to smooth it out, right? And then I can just wash that off, no problem. And if I want, I can go back in and add more cracks as much as I need. that I think would be appropriate for the space. Here, when I'm adding these lines and stuff, I have to be aware because anything that I'm doing at this point, once it starts drying out a lot, these points might become a little too sharp, and they'll crack away. So when it's easier to work more and more when it's dry, and then I'll kind of like take your foot off the gas as it gets, or work on it more when it's wet, and then take your foot off the gas as it dries out, right? So I'm actually adding less things, but I'm adding little details still throughout the process, and that works out effectively pretty well. I can also dab my like a little paper towel on here and stuff like that to give me texture if you don't like it being on your fingers. But don't be afraid to experiment a little bit. There's no exact right or wrong way to do that. That's part of the fun of doing crafts, right? Doing projects like this is nobody can tell you this is the way it has to be, because this is something you're doing for yourself. So I've gone through and I've added all that texture, and then as I was sawing it dry, I didn't really like it. So I'm going back and I'm kind of trying to smooth some of it out because I want my blast crater to look fresh. I want it to look like a shell had just hit it not that long ago, and I want there to be some roughness, but I want there to be a good amount of smoothness too, right? In the other one that I did, I had more areas that were like cracked and flaked up, and so that's just going to be some little variations from one to the next. You're not going to be able to really replicate exactly one blast to another. They're all going to have a little bit different effect, but I like that, right? I like that nowhere in the world do you go does it look exactly the same anywhere, especially in a war zone. I'll take it from personal experience, that it looks vastly different from one area to another. So I can go in here and add some little cracks, and then I can smooth it out, and then by adding some little things, you'll see that there's still some little indentions there. I can kind of use my blade and like pick things up a little bit, like go around. There's all different types of techniques that you can work with the different blades that you have and stuff, and don't be afraid to do so. You know, I will cut into things and then kind of push it to shape it to make it more, you know, rounded or more of an indentation. But I'm pretty happy with that. Like, it doesn't look like a ton. Hopefully you guys have been able to see that. I've just looked at my camera and I see that like there's a good amount of glare when I hold it like this. So hopefully throughout this process you've been able to see it. But you can see now when I put it at an angle, those cracks kind of are highlighted, right? And it looks, it's coming along very nicely. You know, it's starting to look something like what I had before. And the next step is going to be adding on the gravel around the edge, and then later we're going to end up painting it. So we want this to sit for at least another half an hour. It's going to get warm but not hot. It's not going to light on fire or anything. That won't get that hot. So set it somewhere where it can dry, and then when you come back it should basically feel cold to the touch, and that's when you know that it's completely dry. If it doesn't feel cool to the touch, let it go for a little bit longer and it'll then dry out. Okay, and then in the next step, I'll show you about adding the sand around the edges, working that into the interior a little bit, and then the next video completely will go from start to finish as far as painting it, using the house paint and the primer and so on and so forth. All right. Okay, guys, the last step here is going to be adding our play sand, which effectively is the gravel around the edges. Also, what we're going to end up doing is working some of that detail in towards the middle too. Typically, when I'm basing and stuff like that, I use PVA glue for adding gravel. I find that that's a secure enough fix. However, with terrain, I find that using the wood glue will actually help secure it a little bit better. So you see it's quite a bit thicker though, and it's a little bit harder to apply, but it will be quite a bit stronger than what the PVA is normally going to do. What you can do a little bit though, which is what I'm actually going to do here, is grab a little bit of water and you can thin down your wood glue a little bit, which will make it spread a little bit easier and make it go a little bit further. I don't want to thin it down too much because otherwise I'm losing the you know, the reason that I'm using the wood glue here, but it's going to help it go a little bit further, and I want it to have a nice strong hold, because when you're using your terrain in miniature games, you'll tend to you know, be a little bit rougher on the terrain than you will with the models. At least that's been my experience. That's not always true for everybody. I'm basically using this mostly on the edges. The PVA that's going to be on, I could also mix in a little bit of PVA actually to thin it down too. But I definitely want the wood glue on this outer edge. As you see, this is where I'm doing most of it, and then I can use the PVA where I need it to be a little bit more precise on the interior, and it's also less likely to flake off. But I don't want to use. You never want to use wood glue for certain jobs. Like, for instance, when I showed the snow basing and how to add snow effects onto bases, you would never want to use wood glue for that. The reason being is that wood glue tends to actually have a slightly yellow like tinge to it, and by doing that you would taint all of your your snow would all look yellow. And it's surprising how much that actually shows through. Here you can probably see it a little bit when I go up onto this white, because the plaster of Paris is actually quite white, or even where the glue is applied here, you'll see how much more yellow it actually looks. We're not always cognizant of that, so to speak, that's the way it's going to be, but you have to take my word for it that is certainly the case. I'm paying extra special attention here to the edge of this piece of terrain, as I want to make sure that is caught. We beveled it so that way it gave us a nice rounded look, but what we want to wrap the gravel, you know, the little bit of sand here all the way around the edge and stuff like that, because that'll give a nice finished look. It won't look unfinished at all. You don't want to really get it on the bottom. As you see, I'm not putting anything on the bottom, but I'm going right to the edge because we beveled the edge down already in the very first step. And this is the last part of the assembly. Once I'm done with this and it dries, then I can move on to painting. I will walk you guys through the steps on how to properly prime, which is funny because a lot of people assume that they know how to prime models and correctly, and that's just not the case. In fact, I was kind of shocked after years of working on miniatures that I had still had things to learn when it came to basics. So it's never bad to review the basics and stuff. And then be careful because as I'm going around, see, I'm starting to get some a little bit of glue on my hand because I was not really being careful over here. So you want to kind of grab it in the center. This is small enough that you can do this, and it's light enough. Grab it in the center and then hold it on the bottom and just kind of pinch it in between your fingers, and that way you don't get any extra wood glue anywhere that you don't want it to be. So almost done with this. Once I'm done with it, then I'll basically take this and just dump it in here, and I'll smatter some of the play sand over the top. But I want to grab a few little areas that I wasn't really going to have Like I want to bring it up onto some of these indentions that had come down. That's going to complete that effect that we've been looking for, where it looks like it's one continuous piece. So don't be afraid to go inside where the plaster is and inside the stone, because you know the gravel would be in there as well. So you can see how thick this wood glue is. It doesn't spread all that easy. This wood glue is a little dried out. Like when it's fresher, it spreads a little bit easier than this, but we want to be generous, specifically around the sides, and then we want to be very selective with where we're going on the interiors here. Don't just do all of it either. Also leave some little areas where, like, you know, if I add a little bit here, that's okay, but I don't want to add it all over, so that way it's just straight gravel to no gravel. You want little areas of both transitions, and then you'll get the effect much better, versus if you just kind of put it literally everywhere, like it goes straight in all the time, then it won't be as nice. So I'm pretty happy with the way that works. And then make sure, if you want to keep using that brush for literally anything, to clean it off real well. I'm going to do that in a minute, but I want to get the glue on the piece that I've just been working on. And make sure the brush that you use with wood glue, really with any glues, but specifically with wood glue, is a brush you really don't care very much about, because you're not going to... It's going to be very difficult to work with. If you want to use it, continue to use it for wood glue, you can, but you have to work hard at cleaning it out. And so that's what I'll do. And you see, I'm just kind of literally putting the whole edge into the sand. Like I have this nice big Tupperware box, and then you know, sprinkling it on, and then making sure that there's sufficient amounts in there. Normally with the PVA glue, I let it sit for a few minutes and then I brush it off. With wood glue, it has a much stronger hold, but what I'll do is I'll take the time to try and clean out my brush even better. In a later tips and tricks video, I will show you guys how to properly maintain your paintbrushes for maximum effect. You can see that because I basically put it right into the water right away, and I'm cleaning it out pretty well here. It's not like, you know, sticking. It's not a solid lump or anything like that. So you want to, the trick is when you're using any type of brush that you're using with glues, make sure to keep them wet all the time, and then you want to use like some hand soap or something like that to clean it too. I'll show you some different options later on. So now that's been in there for just a moment, you don't need as long with wood glue as you do with PVA and stuff for it to set. I'm going to wipe off the back here, make sure that the sand isn't sticking in the corners, because I don't really want it getting my table all dirty and stuff. And you see what I'm doing, where I'm just tapping the back. That's gonna help get a lot of this off. That's what I'll do with static grass, and I'll do with any type of sands or the snows or anything like that. I'll hit up all of those areas. So a little bit more of this will come off later, but right now I'm just going to let it all dry. You can see that it's got the entire area is done. There's a little bit more than I want in the middle, so I could always take a dry brush. I'm using a wet brush right now because it's what I happen to have handy, but and I can brush all of this off. So you see how that's just coming right on off, because I don't really want the sand too much in the middle. I want a little bit in the middle, but I don't want very much. And then I'll just try and dry my brush off a little bit, and I'll go over it again. And you'll see that a lot of this sand is just coming right off. It's not stuck on there, you know, there's nothing really holding it in place because I didn't apply any glue there. Some of it has picked up some glue from other spots, and just the moisture, but most of the areas where I didn't apply any glue, it's just coming right off of. And we'll get that nice like transition effect. So everywhere that you see
make sure, get my brush back in the water right away, because I don't want, if there was any glue on any of that, I want to make sure. You see that, you know, in the middle we're basically exposing most of the white area. You really don't see the hardboard around the edges now where we've put all the sand down, and then, but we still do see the pink. So when we go to paint and prime and everything, I'll walk you through all those steps and show you exactly how that's done, because you can't just spray paint over this. This is completely built now. It has to sit and dry, let the wood glue do a little bit more work for you in soaking up the sand that's there, but this is ready to go to paint right now. After maybe 20 minutes of drying, it'll be ready to go. So if you enjoyed this video, check in next time and I'll go through and show you how to paint it, so the end product that you see will end up looking almost exactly like this, and you can do it for yourself at home. Thanks very much, guys.